Hello, everyone. I'm Joe Pryweller, Conference Director for Plastics News. Welcome to this session of Ask the Expert, your chance to engage with professionals on a range of topics and to interact with questions. Today's Ask the Expert is sponsored by Shale Crescent USA. Our experts are Greg Kozera, Director of Marketing with Shale Crescent USA, and Joe Eddy, President and CEO of Enhanced Technologies. Greg and Joe will discuss new opportunities for U.S. processors to experience increased profitability and greater market share. Greg and Joe will answer your questions after the presentation. To submit a question, email pnevents@crane.com, or if you're watching along on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube, submit your questions via those platforms. With that, I will turn things over to Greg Kozera and Joe Eddy. Greg, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Joe. Good to be with everyone. My background is in engineering, and I spent 40 years in the energy industry before joining Shale Crescent USA 5 years ago. And Shale Crescent USA, so you know, is a nonprofit economic development and research organization. Our mission is to bring high-wage jobs and raise the standard of living for the people that live in Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, a region that we've branded the Shale Crescent USA. Today, I'm really excited because there's a great new opportunity out there for U.S. processors, and we're going to talk about that today. Next slide, please. During the pandemic, we learned a lot. And one of the things that we all learned as Americans is how much stuff wasn't being made over here anymore. And I'm talking about really important stuff like healthcare PPE, things like masks and gowns, N95 masks, hand sanitizer, sanitation wipes, all those things that we couldn't get, latex gloves, all these things that we weren't making here anymore. And we were depending on other countries to ship them to us. We had healthcare workers. My wife's a nurse. They're running around in trash bags because they couldn't get gowns. And what we learned during the pandemic as Shale Crescent is we couldn't go to live conferences. They were canceled. And that's where we get most of our leads and prospects to talk to people about coming to this region and expanding. And what we learned as we did media nationwide, we run over 70 radio shows, coast to coast. A lot of them, probably a third of them, were nationally syndicated. And Americans, no matter what their political persuasion or their location, want to see manufacturing and the jobs come back to the United States. And we're going to talk about why not only that can happen, but that can happen and really needs to happen. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about what this opportunity is, but what's in it for you? What can make a difference to you and your organization? How big is this opportunity? And what's changed to make this opportunity happen, and how you can take advantage of it? Next slide, please. We're already starting to see that movement of, some people call it onshoring, but right here in my own hometown of Charleston, we've got a petrochemical company downtown that had a process line that was down, and they started during the pandemic. They hired folks and started making hand sanitizer. A good friend of mine has 2 plastics processing plants here in West Virginia. And he makes plastic parts for the construction industry. He couldn't sell those. He started making ventilator parts. And even in my local drugstore, I noticed that the generic drugs, I looked to see where they were made, and they're made in the USA under the guidance of the FDA. And what's really fascinating is the name brand drugs I was buying are more expensive, but they're also made overseas. So we have this great opportunity now to make stuff here again. Next slide, please. And the things we're going to talk about is we've been dealing with these global supply chains. And one of the challenges that we saw during the pandemic is a lot of supply chains went down in this region. And they didn't go down because their workers were sick. They went down because they couldn't get critical parts of that supply chain. Now, one of the fascinating things that happened, a good friend of mine makes products in Pittsburgh, and he was besieged with people coming to him saying, hey, I can't get this, I can't get that, could you make it? So that opportunity began to happen. Guess where they're continuing to buy those things? Right here. But we're going to talk about reliability, supply chains, profitability, why these economics can be much better. And we're going to hit on some sustainability, something we learned that not only can we make things here more profitably, but we can be more sustainable. Next slide, please. Here's how big this opportunity is. From China alone, folks, we're getting $500 billion of products every year being brought into this country. And these aren't all plastics products, but let's face it, most products made today have some plastics component in them. Next slide, please. But we looked at just plastic imports. These are products that are 100% plastic. And that's a $45 billion market. Now, for you processors out there, look at that. If you had a market, we're always worried about, in my years in the energy industry, I was always worried about market share and how big the market was. This is a market that you can play in. And my challenge to you is look at what you're making today. If it's being made overseas and you can make it, there's a really good possibility you can make it more profitably, and you can distribute it a whole lot quicker too. Next slide. Of these plastic imports, 60% of these are coming from Asia. So think about that opportunity. What's next? Next slide, please. How did this happen, though? How did we get here? Next slide. And the focus on this graph, right now, just focus on the gray bars. And what you're seeing starting in 1946, post-World War II, we saw that post-war growth of manufacturing. And we continued to grow manufacturing clear until the 1970s, where manufacturing jobs in the United States peaked at a little over 19 million jobs. The blue line is oil and gas production. So you'll see that direct correlation. As oil and gas production increased, so did manufacturing jobs. And those that have been around a little longer, like me, probably remember the Arab oil embargo, when we suddenly realized that we weren't the big kahuna when it came to oil and gas. We were dependent on OPEC. They made the decision on how much we paid for gasoline here in the United States. And when we lost that ability to call our own destiny shots in energy, when we lost our energy advantage, we lost manufacturing jobs. And you'll see that drop in jobs continued clear through the energy crisis until about 2010. And then you'll see a big upshot in that blue line. That's increase in oil and natural gas. And right today, folks, the United States of America is the leading oil producer and the leading natural gas producer on the planet. And when that happened, we're also seeing an increase now in over 1.4 million new manufacturing jobs. Next slide, please. So what happened? What changed? And Joe's going to talk about that. By the way, Joe Eddy is also the retired CEO of Eagle Manufacturing. So he's been there, done that. So Joe, it's all yours.
Greg, thank you very much. Great intro to what I'd like to talk about today. And starting that is what has changed. But I'd also like to say thank you to Plastics News for providing a platform for us to speak to the plastics processors specifically about these opportunities. And as Greg said, as Joe Pryweller said, I'm the president and CEO of my consulting business now called Enhanced Technologies. But my 40 years in the energy industry and manufacturing industry as a petroleum engineer, 25 of the last part of my career, 25 years as the president and CEO of Eagle Manufacturing. And if you don't know Eagle, we're known very well for our metal products, safety containers, the Eagle gas cans, storage cabinets. But also, what a lot of people don't realize is that over 60% of our business is plastics, and over 600 finished industrial safety and traffic safety products manufactured out of mainly 4 different grades of high-density polyethylene. So a big processor, mostly proprietary, a little bit of custom work, but really sets the stage for the understanding over the last 30 years of what has really changed. And I don't know that that makes me an expert, but it definitely, for you plastic processors that are on here, gives us all a better understanding of what has changed and what these opportunities that Greg had alluded to really are. As Greg noted, one of the biggest changes in the last really of our lifetimes is the shale revolution. So what has happened in the last 10 years, effectively since 2009, 2010, is that the U.S., as Greg noted, has become not only energy independent, but also energy dominant in the world, effectively from scarcity of resources to an abundance. And that has created a major sea change in the world, politically, definitely economically. Definitely for us, it provides economic growth potential, national security, business opportunity. And what I like to say, and I like to speak often because it's one thing CEOs need to consider, and that's providing competitive, sustainable competitive advantage for us. Let's move to the next slide, please. What else has changed other than the shale revolution? As part of the shale revolution, there's been a major shift in where that energy is produced and where those new gas reserves specifically and natural gas liquids production and reserves have shifted. Of the 32 billion cubic feet of natural gas production added per day since 2010, about 26.5 or a little bit more BCFs per day comes from the Shale Crescent region of Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. That's over 85% of the growth of natural gas and natural gas liquids in the United States since the shale revolution began. So that's a huge part of the growth. And if you look for Texas, who we're often compared to, you can see Texas is about 10% of the growth, 2.3 BCF per day compared to the 26.5. Let's move to the next slide. We produce so much energy now in the Shale Crescent region of the United States that this is another major change. We've really become a global energy leader, not only as the United States, but as a Shale Crescent region. In fact, with the increases in production, if the Shale Crescent region were considered a country of its own, we would literally be the third largest natural gas producing country in the world, behind the rest of the United States and Russia. And you can see the other top 10 producers of natural gas in the world. And I will note number 7, China, because I'll be talking a little bit more about that literally on the next slide, because and you'll understand why I'm not targeting China per se for any political reasons or otherwise, but you'll understand that when you see where the lion's share of those plastics imports come from, it creates a big target as far as our potential market share increases. So let's move to the next slide. Okay, what has changed with our energy advantage, the Shale Crescent region? You can see how we compare in natural gas production to China. We literally dwarf China with our production, and gives us a very distinctive energy advantage that we really haven't had for about 40 years. And a lot of things have changed in the last 10 years because of this. Let's go to the next slide. And not only has the Shale Crescent region been the largest add for natural gas and liquids production in the world, in North America and the world per se for the last 10 years, we also are projected to be the largest growth potential of natural gas liquids production going forward to at least 2040. So that right now, just for an example, over the last 10 years, 12 years, we have over 30 midstream companies, or actually midstream plants now in the Shale Crescent region that have throughput of about 10 BCF, 10 billion cubic feet of natural gas per day, with the capacity to produce 1 million barrels of natural gas liquids, mainly ethane, per day. So you can see the building of the base and the building blocks for the feedstock for our industry, for plastics processing industry. So anyway, let's go to the next slide, and we'll talk here about one of the other major opportunities of change that has happened. And that has what I would consider our second largest change other than energy, is the fact that the Chinese labor rates have increased so much in the last 20 years. you can see on the chart here, but to put it a couple of other ways, 30 years ago or 20 years ago, we were looking at the potential for ultimately, when China came into the World Trade Organization, everybody realized how low their manufacturing costs were on a comparison basis. Their labor rates were really very, very low. So in the last 20 years, China's wage rates have increased tenfold. They've literally doubled every 4 or 5 years. Creating now an advantage, and what was once an enormous manufacturing cost advantage is no longer valid. The United States now, if we move to the next slide, you can see manufacturing cost index put out by the Boston Consulting Group really confirms what we have seen at Eagle and through these last 15, 20 years. Those labor rates, as well as our added energy advantage here in the United States, have closed that 30% gap to more like 2, 3, or 4%. As you see on here, it shows a 4% gap between our manufacturing cost indexes. And I would safely say today that gap is not only narrow, but has completely closed between China and the US. So that is another major factor as far as what has changed. We are on parity now on manufacturing, not only labor rates, but electricity, natural gas. We have the energy advantage, as well as with our productivity gains in the United States. Because of the cheap labor in China, their productivity gains, it was easier just to add people instead of productivity improvements with technology. So right now we are on parity with manufacturing costs. That's just on the cost basis. We have other opportunities, as Greg noted, what I like to call proximity. That's proximity to markets, proximity to raw materials, and to our feedstocks. So let's look at the next slide. The other major change for the Northeast has been that we haven't had for 40 years, 50 years, cracking of ethane in this basin and in this region. Now we have local resin production that will be coming in 2022. Number one, with the Shale ethane cracker in Monaca, PA, right in the heart of the Shale Crescent region. And then they will be producing into 2022-23 at least 4 streams of high density polyethylene, linear low density, a lot of different grades potential of plastic resins. And in addition to that 3.5 billion from Shell pounds per year, we also are still right on the edge of hearing within, I believe personally, within 6 months to a year. We've had some trouble because of the pandemic, but with PTT Global Chemical out of Thailand making an FID announcement for building the same size world scale cracker in Belmont County, Ohio. So with that would be another 3.5 billion pounds of capacity per year, all right here in the heart of the Shale Crescent region in the Northeast, supplying really what is the largest plastics processing market in the United States. So with that, local resin production is one of our other major sea changes. So with local production, what does that give us? Shorter supply chain. That gives us some great things like reduced working capital costs. We don't have to wait so long on our resin and have potential for delayed deliveries by rail car or otherwise. So we don't have to keep as much inventory. So it reduces our working capital costs. We have a significant transportation cost savings. Right now, I know for rail car costs from the Gulf Coast, it runs anywhere from 6 to 8 cents. It's built into the cost and contracts. I understand that. However, I know part of that is the cost and drayage for rail cars. So anyway, 6 to 8 cents per pound. You look at that on a small plastic processor like Eagle with 25 million pounds per year. It's some real bottom line dollars, of potential opportunity savings. So the other thing are reduced resin costs. Because of that, increased capacity and competition in the Northeast now to create. As far as capacity, if we add another 3.5 billion in the next 4 years, and another 3.5 billion starting 5 years from now, that's a small percentage, probably 20% of the capacity required here, of the demand required. So it will still help us with pricing, no question about it. Let's look at the next slide. So I like to say this and say, let's talk now. What's the real prize that we're talking about when you talk about opportunity? What's the prize? Why are we even on here speaking with you today? So as Greg noted, increased market share, sustainable competitive advantage is great, but you need to have increased market share, or if the plastics market in the U.S. is only growing by 3 or 4% per year, where's the big prize? Well, the big prize is in bringing back a lot of that production from Asia. Being over 60% of the total imports of plastic, as Greg noted, 100% of only we're talking about 100% plastic products. There's a lot more than that $45 billion per year. But with Asia, mostly from China, providing over 60% of that import into the U.S., that's over a market potential of over $25 billion per year of additional market share that we could recapture. So I always like to say, and this is definitely the case, I think in every industry and in every business, as a leader, I like to say that the biggest opportunities really exist for growth out of the biggest challenges. So this has been a challenge for all of us, and a lot of us, I know, a lot of our competitors have moved some of their production to Asia. I understand that, but now might be the time and the best opportunity for profitability, and as Greg noted, sustainability, to bring that back. So with that, I think we bring that market share back. We produce products here. We increase manufacturing jobs, our profitability, and so let's look at the next slide real quick here. And so again, what's in it for us? Greg noted some of this. As plastics processors, I said proximity is the important thing. Proximity provides the opportunity. The Shale Crescent region is one of the only places, and what I would consider definitely the best place now in the world, where you can manufacture, especially plastics products, the best and only place in the world where you can manufacture right on top of feedstock and right in the middle of the largest market for our products in the world. So what does that lead to? Improved reliability through supply chain security, improved profitability for us through better economics, as far as and as well as market share growth, as well as sustainability and environmental benefits, which I think really we all hear about that, and sustainability, and what does that mean? Well, I think there's a lot to be said about that, and we'll be talking more about that in our next 2 sessions. But where does that lead us to? A tremendous amount of environmental benefits that can give us a boost, not only for our profitability for business-wise, but also for being good stewards of the planet and the world, which I know that we all are. So anyway, with that, I'd like to turn back over to Greg to discuss where we're really going next with our next 2 sessions, and then we'll get into the point of answering some of your questions. So we look forward to that. Thank you. And thank you, Greg. Take over, please.
Next slide, please. Thanks, Joe. Good stuff. One of the things we heard a lot of last month at the Plastic News Executive Conference was sustainability and carbon footprint. And we're going to probably hear a lot more of that. So, but we're going to really focus on we're going to be back with you the 19th of May. And I want you to think about something before we do that, because right now, look at Asia, think about where their energy is coming from. And it's coming from either Russia or the Middle East right now. That takes some transportation to get it there. And once they make those products over there and ship them to us, that's 60% plastic products. That's halfway around the world, folks. Think about that when it comes to sustainability. Next slide, please. We have this incredibly unique opportunity, maybe a generational opportunity, that we can become more sustainable. And in that same realm, can you imagine more sustainable and increase your profits and create jobs all in the same fell swoop, so to speak. So we're going to be back with you on May 19th. Please reach out to us even after the Q&A. Contact us. We'd love to talk to you. And hey, this is a great opportunity. We're going to do all we can. We don't charge fees. We're nonprofit. So we just want to see jobs come back to this region. Joe, back to you, Pryweller. Thank you, folks.
Great. Thanks, Greg and Joe, for a terrific presentation. Wow, learned a lot about what we can do here and the opportunities here for U.S. processors. Let's start off, talk a little bit more about Shale Crescent USA in that region. First of all, maybe I'll have you, want you to define again, what states or what area does Shale Crescent USA encompass with that? What area are you looking at?
Joe, do you want to take it?
Well, yeah, it really is a pretty sizable region, but the real focus, because of the energy increases and what we've really been able to do in this area with the Marcellus Shale and the Utica Shale, has been really the focal point. The Shale Crescent region is Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, and that's all of Pennsylvania, including northeastern Pennsylvania's production in the Marcellus. So that is the focus point of what is considered the Shale Crescent region, Joe.
Great. I should have mentioned at first, if you have questions you want to ask, you can email them to pnevents@crane.com, or if you're watching along on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook, send your questions via those platforms, and we'll get to those in the order that they are received. Now that we define what the region is a little bit, what makes Shale Crescent USA in particular a desirable region for manufacturing? Why would, if I was a processor, be interested in manufacturing in that region?
Greg, I'll touch on this, Greg, and then I'll turn it over to you, because there's lots of things we've just talked about. But, you know, one of the things that really makes this region special is what I would call, you know, we have a great transportation hub. We have railroads, waterways. It's a matter of resources. We have human resources. We have great skilled and educated employees, dedicated and great work ethic. Like I said, we have transportation routes. We're right in the middle of the largest markets for our products in the world. And we're right on top of our feedstock now with an energy advantage that's not only for feedstock, but also natural gas and natural gas pricing, you know, for warming our plants and running our processing units and creating and making steam, you know, and burning in our things for our metal products for powder coat painting, you know, all the different reasons that our industry, as well as all of manufacturing, is an energy intensive industry. So lower prices for electricity, lower prices for, you know, for natural gas, lower prices now coming for feedstock. And I know everybody's concerns right now are about pricing and what's going to happen to resin. I've been in this for 40 years and I've seen lots of cycles, and effectively this is again another cycle. But the Shale Crescent region is also, with those three states, regulatory wise, is very supportive of the industries that we're in. That's part of the reasons we're here. Now we have those advantages that we had 20 to 40 years ago that we've lost, now coming back with the energy, with the increased, effectively, Asian labor rates are a big reason. But anyway, the Shale Crescent region is special. Again, like I said, it's one of the only places in the world where you can manufacture your product right on top of your feedstock and right in the middle of the largest market in the world.
Excellent. Well,
I can add something to that.
Go ahead, Greg. Sorry.
I met with a company last week, and everything Joe said, once they learned that, they're going to open a facility here in West Virginia. They're going to manufacture gloves. Guess where they're going to sell those gloves? They've already got them pre-sold in their own backyard, literally. So this region the Shale Crescent region is also one of the largest economies of the world. Half of the Canadian U.S. population is within a few hours drive of where we live. So just another thought.
Excellent. Well, let's talk about, you talked a lot about bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. and striking number was a 45 billion just in plastics that's coming from China right now, and not to mention the 500 billion overall that's coming there. Do you see some of this changing due to, I guess let's start off a little bit about natural gas. You mentioned that natural gas, the U.S. is leading producer. You mentioned Shale Crescent itself is number 3 in a lot of cases. What does that mean for U.S. manufacturers? How can that help bring some of the manufacturing back to the States?
Greg, go ahead.
Okay. Just the fact that we have this abundant resource and it's literally, as Joe said, under the plant. I think that's, and the other thing that's really important, we had the last live Select USA, we had several companies from Asia that we talked to that were actually in the region. And one of their focus, I said, what keeps you awake at night? And their executives told us this, Joe. We're worried about our supply chain. We're worried about our energy because think about it. You got a ship blocking the Suez Canal, or you have some other challenge in the Middle East. That's their energy that's at stake. Or they got to get it from a ship or a pipeline somewhere. Like Joe said, right here, right now, it's in your backyard, and that energy security is absolutely huge. So it's not just cost, but it's also knowing that it's there, and you don't have to worry about some of the other supply chain issues that processors around the world have to deal with.
Excellent. Has the pandemic changed some of the outlook for companies wanting to manufacture in the U.S. too? What effect does that have on the possibilities that more companies might want to decide to manufacture in the U.S.?
I think we're going to see, and a good friend of mine, Jim Blasingame, does a nationally syndicated radio show. He always talks about regional supply chains, and that's really what I think we're going to see. Companies are going to begin to realize that there's a cost to that global supply chain, but there's a lot of advantages to working regionally. I think we're going to see a lot of that. Good friend of mine has a manufacturing facility, and I asked him what kept him awake at night, and he was worried about the exchange rate between the dollar and the yen. And I didn't grasp that at first. He said, Greg, I'm getting 60% of my stuff from Asia, particularly from Tokyo. He said, I don't even know what my profitability is. And he's in the process of fixing that problem. And right now, I think he's flipped it. It's 40% Asia, 60% US. So knowing even that one little piece is huge. So I think we're going to see a lot more Asian countries. The real message is, and we've got one company we're already working with that they're in process right now. They're on site. And their mindset was, let's come here. If we're going to sell into this market, let's make the stuff here.
Great. Here's a question that came in via email at pnevents@crane.com if you want to ask a question. Do you see the policy and legislation support enabling onshoring and investment of the entire value chain on auxiliary supplies? How has legislative support and policy affected some of this?
Sure.
Well, that's a tough one to touch on. We look at that as part of our job at Shale Crescent to make sure that we keep our legislators, both locally and regionally, but nationally, more especially, because they're the ones that really have the biggest effect on this, not only for supporting this program of reshoring, but also we need to keep them engaged, and that we look at that, and we are. I mean, we're working with our local senators and congressmen, U.S. congressmen and senators. I wouldn't say daily, but we are in contact with them constantly, at least weekly, and they're all familiar with Shale Crescent USA, and we're engaged in trying to work on legislation that this is in effect, and inputting and inserting parts that help us do what Greg had said earlier. Our main objective is to improve the neighborhood per se. and that is to provide jobs, great manufacturing jobs that have 4.5 additional support jobs for every job. So we have a great story. We get listened to very well about it. I think that's an important part of why, Greg talked about cost savings. That's very important, but the risk to the country and the security by not having the products sourced nationally now that we found in the pandemic. So I think cost and profitability is one thing, risk is another. And as CEOs and business managers and leaders, managing risk, to support that competitive advantage that we are always striving for, I think is really important. But we got to keep our senators and congressmen engaged. We need to continue to educate them, and we have been. And I think that we got a good ear. I mean, I know that in West Virginia, for example, Senators Capito and Manchin understand, energy and understand our plastics processing industry. I know Congressman McKinley, U.S. Congressman McKinley, carries around a plastic bottle full of resin, and he often jokes about getting stopped at airports, having to tell them what that is, because it's white resin. And they get it, and they're telling the story more and more. And I know our congressman in Ohio is keyed into the Shale Crescent meetings frequently. So yes, I think that, on a broader perspective, there's a lot of draw on their time right now, and a lot of different issues. But for those folks that get it and understand the importance of manufacturing to the United States and to our growth and recoveries, they understand and are supportive of trying to do these things for reshoring. I've read a lot of the legislation, and I would say the answer is yes, but we need to continue the educational parts of this and keep them engaged in this industry. Go ahead, Greg.
No, that's. I think you've covered it, Joe. I think that's good stuff. And we were very active in trade associations. Again, we're not so much politically active as much as we're supplying information that people can carry to those elected officials.
Well, Greg and Joe, we're running short on time. I'm going to ask you, if you didn't get to your question, they'll be funneled to both of you, and you'll be able to answer them and have a discussion about the Shale Crescent region and what it can mean. I should ask if one of you has any parting words, final comments that you want to leave the audience with.
I see this as a generational opportunity, and when the opportunity is there, this is probably one of the best times to seize it. And we're already seeing companies that are serious about that right here. So if you're looking to expand, look at that $45 billion market alone and decide how you can participate in that. I think, and please call us, email us, look at our website. We're happy to talk to you. Again, we don't charge any fees. We just want to see jobs, and we want to see this region grow again. Thanks. I appreciate the opportunity, Joe.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. And if you want, and that brings you a point here, if you have additional questions or just want to talk about this, you can email Greg and Joe, and their email addresses are on the screen at the bottom there, and they'll be happy to talk to you about it. I again want to thank Greg Kozera of Shale Crescent USA and Joe Eddy of Enhanced Technologies for sharing with us their insights into some new opportunities for U.S. manufacturers. Again, if you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to them directly at the email address on the screen below. Shale Crescent USA, as Greg mentioned, is sponsoring 2 more Ask the Expert sessions. The Ask the Expert session on May 19th will be titled Increased Profitability, Connecting Energy, Petrochemicals, and Manufacturing and Plastics. And join us again for a third Ask the Expert session on June 16th. Today's Ask the Expert session will also be available for viewing on the events section of Plastics News website. I'm Joe Pryweller with Plastics News. We'll end with a short message from Shale Crescent USA. We'll see you at a future Ask the Expert session.
Thank you.